This is a 4-part lecture on the art of the Romanov Dynasty. To tell this story, I am using artwork created during the time of each Romanov tsar and artwork painted years after their deaths. Starting in 1862, Russian artists began drawing on the rich folklore and historical events of their country's past. By placing these historical paintings into this story, their artwork has context and brings to life the Romanov Dynasty. During part 1, we learned of the rise of the Romanov family and the crowning of the first Romanov Tsar, Michael I. The first 100 years of the Romanov dynasty was a period of barbarianism as Russia struggled through the Middle Ages for hundreds of years, longer than Europe. The next 100 years, the period covered during part 2, is a time of westernization for Russia as their two most famous tsars, Peter the Great and Catherine the Great, steer the country into the future. Peter the Great. We begin with this beautiful portrait by Paul Delaroche that was painted over 100 years after Peter's death. 2 years into his reign, in June of 1698, a dissatisfied group of Streltsy rebelled with the intent of overthrowing Peter and putting Sophia on the throne. The rebellion was unsuccessful. Peter tortured the Streltsy, doing all kinds of horrible, barbaric things to them, and then he executed over 1,000 of them. Allegedly, Peter beheaded some of the men himself. In this painting, which was painted in 1881, the artist Vasily Sarakov portrays the morning of the execution of the Strelskys. And here we see Peter on a horse over here in the corner, and in the back are the gallows. We see the famous church, St. Basil's, with its head chopped off. And then we see the group of the Streltsy armies here with their families, their children. They're holding candles, and you'll see that the candles are getting ready to burn out. And that is symbolism for that their lives are ready to end. The artist Surakov paints himself back here in the corner. Peter the Great was really famous for westernizing Russia. Here we have a beautiful portrait of the young Peter by the English portrait artist Godfrey Kneller. This was painted during Peter the Great's time. Peter transformed Russia from a medieval time to a modern country. He loved ships and built a navy. He wanted a seaport in Russia. So at the age of 23, he set his sights on the Caspian Sea. Peter also built a Baltic port. Peter left Russia to go to Europe, where he learned high-tech shipbuilding. He went to Holland to learn how to build ships. He went to Britain and he learned dentistry. He brought the first newspaper and hospital to Russia. He made many changes to religion, and he purged the icons from the churches, or he attempted to. Here we see a fun painting by Valentin Serov showing Peter the Great building St. Petersburg. In 1703, Peter ordered the construction of a new fortress on an island on the mouth of the Neva River, which became St. Petersburg. It is said that the city was built on the bones of the serfs, so it was basically marshland. They had to build up the land so that they could build cities onto it. Probably one of his greatest accomplishments. In 1704, while he was on a campaign in Lavinia, Peter met a beautiful peasant woman called Marta. And in 1707, Peter and Marta were secretly married, with Marta adopting Orthodoxy and taking on the name Catherine. And here we see a very old drawing. This was later on when they announced their marriage and it became more formal. Peter was married to another woman, which was an arranged marriage by his mother. It was a loveless marriage, and he ended up sending her to a convent. This is a beautiful portrait by French artist Jean-Marc Natte of Catherine I, 10 years before she died. She did rule for 3 years after Peter's death, but was known as the Party Empress and really did not get much done. 1709, and the Swedish and Russian armies met in a battle in Poltava, which is in modern-day Ukraine. The Battle of Poltava was a decisive victory for Peter I over the Swedish forces. This is a battle that became known as the Great Northern War. While Peter was in Holland, he bought this painting by Rembrandt, and he brought it to Russia. It's the first Rembrandt to come to Russia. And it's David Farewell to Jonathan. Their fathers were rivals of the kingdom of Israel. So this would have meant something to Peter. These two friends were going to be in battle against each other on the next day. So they're saying goodbye to each other. And here we're going to go back to this portrait of Michael I, which was the first Tsar. It was painted in 1728, and it's a copy from an original. And it was done by a Baltic German painter, Jonathan Wiedeking, who Peter the Great brought to Russia. And you can see that it's really the beginning of molding the icon, flat icon painting with a more three-dimensional realistic style. So this is the level of work that was being done in Russia at the time. This was a Russian artist who Peter sent to Holland in 1716 to study. And then John Nikitin studied in Italy. And then this is a very famous painting of Peter the Great interrogating his son Alexei. He ends up feeling that Alexei is too lazy to become Tsar, and he locks him up in jail and has him poisoned. This is a very important painting that Nikolai Gay painted during the second half of the 1800s, talking to the Russian people to be careful about the decisions that you make. Next in line was Peter II, who ruled for 3 years until his death in 1730. Here we have a painting by Johann Paul Luden, a German painter who came to St. Petersburg in 1728 on the invitation of Peter II. Anna Ivanova was the daughter of Tsar Ivan V. She was Empress of Russia for approximately 10 years, and she continued the building of St. Petersburg that Peter had started. This is a portrait by Louis Caravacci. He was a French portrait artist who worked in Russia. He painted portraits of Peter, Anna, and Elizabeth. And then we see here another very similar portrait, almost exactly the same table, pillow, scepter, the whole thing. This is now Elizabeth. In December of 1741, she saw an opportunity to overthrow Anna, and so she took it. She's the oldest surviving daughter of Peter the Great. This portrait was commissioned by Catherine II. It was done by a German artist, Henrik Buschhoff. He worked in St. Petersburg. He actually never saw Elizabeth for this painting. He created a very pompous portrait with all the necessary attributes. I feel like this painting really sums up Elizabeth. This is Elizabeth at Tsarskoye Selo. Tsarskoye Selo translates to children's village. So at the age of 31, with little knowledge or experience about the affairs of state, Elizabeth became Emperor of Russia. She was a committed supporter of the arts, and she also loved architecture. So she continued working along her father's lines, and she brought Italian architect Bartolome Rastelli to Russia. Together they worked on a lot of buildings, and they developed a style of architecture that became known as Elizabethan Baroque. So she was responsible for the construction of a large and beautiful convent in St. Petersburg called Smolny Convent. She renovated the Winter Palace greatly, and she built the Catherine Summer Palace. These engravings and paintings were done during Elizabeth's time by a Russian artist, Elfim Vinogradov. Really quite remarkable. And then this is a modern day picture of the Hermitage outside. And then as we walk into the Hermitage, this is the entrance. And you can see it's really that over-the-top Baroque style, sort of a cross between Rococo and Baroque, in my opinion. paintings in the ceiling. And then this is Catherine's summer palace, and she rebuilt this 6 times down to the ground. She tore it down to the ground and kept building until it got to be what she wanted. And it's very ornate and over the top inside. She died. There was enough money in the Russian treasury to buy 1 ox. That's all there was, because she basically spent it. And again, still very little going on in the world of painting. It was very much dominated by portraits. And here we have a Russian portrait artist, Ivan Vigée-Lebrun, and he was a pupil of Caravaggio. And we're seeing that he's beginning to break away from that iconic flat style. Okay, Peter III, he ruled for 6 months. He was the son of Elizabeth's younger sister, Anna, and Elizabeth had him brought to Russia to be her heir. And Elizabeth also found him a wife, which was Princess Sophia from Germany, and together they converted to Russian Orthodoxy. He took the name of Peter, and she took the name of Catherine, after Elizabeth's mother, Catherine I. So once Elizabeth dies, Peter III takes the throne, and he was considered an idiot and a drunk. He didn't like Russia. I mean, one can only imagine being raised by Elizabeth. Basically, the 20 years of his life, he probably was able to have anything that he wanted. He was very childish. So there was a really big coup. This is a wonderful painting of Catherine the Great. So in 1762, there was a rebellion to overthrow Peter III, led by Alexei Orlov. And the Orlov brothers ended up killing Peter in a barn. So then Catherine was able to take over. So under her rule, the Russian Empire expanded. She continued to modernize along Western European lines. She revitalized Russia, which grew even stronger. Catherine established the first school to educate women. She organized a national school network that trained teachers and provided books. And she started the patronage of the Imperial Academy. The Imperial Academy had already been started a number of years earlier by Ivan Shuvalov, who was Elizabeth's lover. And he started it as a school for gifted boys in his own palace. But once Catherine started providing patronage, everything started to change. So now they were able to bring over teachers from Europe who had skills, and they were able to set up a structure. And one of the things they did is they created the Imperial Academy as a government body or department. And so they were able to rank artists based on specific specifications that they set up. One of the sculptures that Catherine had commissioned by this French sculpture artist, and there's a funny story here. He kept asking her, "What do you want me to do?" This is a sculpture of Peter the Great, and after Catherine took over, she wanted to show the Russian people that she was really a Romanov and that they had nothing to worry about. And here's, Peter, part of the bloodline. And so the artist kept saying, "Well, what do you want? What do you want?" And Catherine would just say, "I don't really care. You're the artist. You do it. And I just want something big and grand." So what they ended up doing was hauling this huge rock. You can see the building behind it. That rock is huge. They hauled it from Finland, and they put this huge bronze statue on top of it. The main style of art that was happening early in Catherine's reign was sentimentalism. And this is basically one with nature, quiet domestic joys. These portraits incorporate nature and music as a device to sort of talk about portraying the inner soul. And one of the first Russian artists to gain a high level of skill was Vladimir Borovikovsky. And here we see a portrait of 2 princesses, and one is playing the guitar and the other is reading poetry, and it's meant to say that they're kindred souls. And here we have another beautiful portrait by Borovikovsky. And the use of the rose is a symbol of beauty, and she's in nature. It's a really gorgeous piece. Elizabeth Louis Vigée-Lebrun came to Russia after the French Revolution happened and Marie Antoinette was beheaded, and she did a number of portraits at the end of Catherine's life of Catherine's family and some friends. And here we see a portrait of Catherine's grandchildren. Initially, Catherine was not very happy with this because there was a lot of too much flesh. So the artist went back on top of it and gave the daughters sleeves and raised the neckline of the dresses. Catherine loved Fragonard because she loved all these little stories that he would tell in his paintings. And there's a number of them at the Hermitage that she collected. Catherine was quite the art collector, and the way she went about it was she positioned her advisors in various places throughout Europe near where they heard that various noble people were having financial problems. And they were looking for not only paintings, but they were looking for furniture. Because up until this time, what they were doing is that they were carting furniture back and forth between St. Petersburg and Moscow. If they had to be in court in Moscow, they would pack up all the furniture in St. Petersburg and they would cart it over to Moscow, and then vice versa. So her first sizable purchase was in 1773 when she purchased a collection of 225 paintings from an art dealer in Berlin. The collection was originally destined for King Frederick II of Prussia. Of these paintings, there were 5 masterpieces, 3 Rembrandts, a Franz Hall, and a Rubens. The next collection that she purchased was the Dresden collection. In 1769, Catherine scooped up the famous Dresden collection belonging to the late Count Heinrich von Brühl, and the collection included 4 Rembrandts, a Caravaggio, and 5 works by Rubens. Then there was the Crozat collection. In 1772, Catherine purchased the famous collection of Pierre Crozat. This included 8 Rembrandts, 4 Veroneses, 12 by Rubens, 7 by Van Dyck, and several by Raphael, Titian, and Tintoretto. Then in 1778, she was able to get the greatest conquest, probably, was England's famed Walpole collection. So she received news that the spendthrift grandson of the heir of the Sir Robert Walpole collection wanted to sell the entire family collection. So it represented some of the finest and most famous paintings of a private collection in England, and perhaps the finest in the world. Sir Robert Walpole had actually dedicated 40 years of his life to building this collection. This collection included Rembrandt's Abraham's Sacrifice of Isaac, 15 works by Van Dyck, and 13 by Rubens. The Walpole collection confirmed Catherine's reputation as Europe's foremost collector of art. During her reign, her collection grew to almost 4,000 paintings, making her the greatest collector of and patron of the arts in the history of Europe. Thank you for joining me today as we took a look at the art during the Romanov Dynasty. I invite you to visit Musings on Art to see other videos on art, as well as lots of articles about the art in Russia as well as Europe and Asia.